This is Land of Havilah of Leviticus 2, which is Yahweh's instructions for meal offerings. Meal in this case means grain, offerings of grain. There are multiple ways of presenting grain. The first way, verse 1, when anyone offers an offering of a meal offering to Yahweh, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. He shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests, and he shall take his handful of its fine flour and of its oil with all its frankincense, and the priest shall burn its memorial on the altar, an offering made by fire of a pleasant aroma to Yahweh. That which is left of the meal offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. It's the most holy thing of the offerings of Yahweh made by fire. Comment in verse 1, the first way of presenting grain offering is in the form of raw, fine flour with oil poured on and frankincense placed on. In verse 2, the priest will put a handful of this on the altar, including all the frankincense, and keep the rest for himself. The handful that goes to the altar goes up in a pleasant aroma to God. The handful is called the memorial portion, meaning God will remember the person that he gave it. Peter told Cornelius, quote, your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God, Acts 10:4. God remembers our offerings. In verse 1, frankincense is a tree resin which can be hardened. When it's burned on the altar, it'll create an aroma of incense. In verse 1, the flour should be fine. Coarse flour would be disrespectful, so put in the work to grind it or pound it thoroughly. As Christians, let's not insult God with shoddy service. Coming up, several ancient recipes for cooked grain that Yahweh will accept. There's too much detail for it to stick with us. Verse 4. When you offer an offering of a meal offering baked in the oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers anointed with oil. If your offering is a meal offering made on a griddle, it shall be of unleavened fine flour mixed with oil. You shall cut it in pieces and pour oil on it. It's a meal offering. If your offering's a meal offering of the pan, it shall be made of fine flour with oil. You shall bring the meal offering that is made of these things to Yahweh, and it shall be presented to the priest, and he shall bring it to the altar. The priest shall take from the meal offering its memorial, and shall burn it on the altar, an offering made by fire of a pleasant aroma to Yahweh. That which is left of the meal offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. It's a thing most holy of the offerings of Yahweh made by fire. Comment, every grain offering in verses 1 to 10 has several things in common. All of them should include oil. The priest will burn a handful on the altar, which is the memorial portion, and the priest will keep the rest. Verse 11, no meal offering which you shall offer to Yahweh shall be made with yeast, for you shall burn no yeast, nor any honey, as an offering made by fire to Yahweh. Comment, yeast puffs up. It's also translated leaven. It symbolizes sin, emptiness, and worthlessness. Matthew 16:6, Mark 8:15, Luke 12:1, and 1 Corinthians 5:6. Leaven would make a grain offering look like more than what it really is. In Acts chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira sold some land and offered up the proceeds, but they presented the money in a puffed-up form for show, and God struck them dead. So when we serve God, we don't make a show of it and say, look what a big job I'm doing. We do whatever we do in sincerity and humility. We don't serve God to be seen or remembered by men, but rather in complete secrecy if possible, so that only God sees. God hates hypocrites who don't believe in Him and serve Him only to leave an impression on men. In verse 11, no honey shall go up on the altar. This is one of the many fine details of the book of Leviticus on which your narrator has no particular revelation. Maybe it was just a practical matter that honey was too sticky and messy to deal with in a grain offering. Yahweh did accept honey. Israelites owed a tenth of all agricultural products, honey included, 2 Chronicles 31:15. But honey didn't belong in a grain offering. Speaking of leaven and honey, verse 12, as an offering of first fruits you shall offer them to Yahweh, but they shall not rise up for a pleasant aroma on the altar. Comment, first fruits is a technical term here. It refers to the first portion of a crop. For example, the first sheaf harvested from the wheat crop is to be presented to Yahweh, Leviticus 23:10. The first of everything goes to Yahweh. It's only a token portion, the first fruits, not a bulky portion like the tithe. It's just a little something by which a man remembers God when he first dips his sickle into the grain, or when he first dips his hand into the honey of a beehive, and so forth. It's an acknowledgement as a man's first thought that God did this. First fruits won't apply until Israel enters the Promised Land, because until then there will be no agriculture. Verse 13, every offering of your meal offering you shall season with salt. You shall not allow the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your meal offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. Comment, every meal offering should include salt. Your narrator mixed a small portion of oil and flour and put them on a cookie sheet, baked it, and tasted it. The salt was very noticeably missing. It needs a little salt, or it's not what it should be. In verse 13, another technical term, the salt of the covenant, end quote. A covenant of salt means a solemn, irreversible agreement, Numbers 18:19 and 2 Chronicles 13:5. If it's a covenant of salt, you don't fail to keep it. You have to keep it. The covenant between Yahweh and Israel is basically, quote, if you'll obey my voice, you shall be my treasured possession, Exodus 19. So the people's end of the covenant was obedience, and Yahweh's end was to bless them, to treasure them, to make things go well for them. Salt is the reminder of that simple covenant, that simple dynamic, that it should not be broken. How salt came to be a symbol of permanence and solemnity, your narrator doesn't know, but that is what it was, Numbers 18:19 and 2 Chronicles 13:5. It turned out that Israel was woefully incapable of obedience. It's the same for all men, that at some point we're disobedient, thus the need for a Savior. In the Christian era, Yahweh's replaced the covenant of Moses with a new and better covenant based on the Messiah, based on His Spirit indwelling and empowering each believer to be faithful, and grace to cover the times when we're not. Coming up, how to offer the first fruits of grain, verse 14. If you offer a meal offering of first fruits to Yahweh, you shall offer for the meal offering of your first fruits grain in the ear parched with fire, bruised grain of the fresh ear. You shall put oil on it and lay frankincense on it. It's a meal offering. The priest shall burn its memorial, part of its bruised grain and part of its oil, along with all its frankincense. It's an offering made by fire to Yahweh. Comment, that was first fruits of grain, just a token amount of that first little part harvested. The person bringing it should include oil and frankincense, and the salt goes without saying. The priest burned a memorial portion, including all the frankincense, and kept the rest. The common theme for all meal offerings is still oil, salt, and a memorial portion that goes up to Yahweh. Leviticus 3 is next at landofhavilah.net.